Welcome to Pickup Game. I'm Seth Greenberg. I'm excited about today's show. We've got the head basketball coach at NC State, Kevin Keatts, and my dear friend, Andy Katz, who is basically the voice of March Madness for the NCAA, Turner Broadcasting, and the Big Ten Network, and an all-around one of the greatest dudes in the world, even though he is a guru. But before we start, as we always do, we really want to make sure that we thank the first responders and the essential workers and all those people that each and every day are risking their lives for the good of others. The greatest teammates, people that are going to work every day, dealing with this horrendous pandemic and serving others, whether it's the doctors, the nurses, the hospital workers, the people that move our food chain. We thank them so much. And then the other thing is we've got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. We're in unprecedented times. And look, let's have some discipline. Let's put on our mask. Let's practice social distancing. Let's make good decisions. Let's make good choices, because we can only do this if we all do it together. Put that mask on, and you know what? The life you might save might not be your own, but it might be one of your loved ones. And then finally, as a society, we need to have greater humanity, greater compassion, greater caring for each other. Black lives matter, all lives matter, but most importantly, humanity matters. And we've got to care for each other. We've got to treat each other with greater respect. We've got to eliminate stereotypes, whether they're racial, whether they're religious, whether they're professional, and treat each other with dignity and respect. And, I say it all the time when I meet with some of my former players is let's try to do something for someone else every single day. And if we can do that, the pandemic that we can start is a pandemic of positivity and solutions as opposed to confrontation. So having said that, I am excited to bring on Kevin Keatts, my good friend, and Andy Katz. And I'm going to go with you first because you've been in conversations with Dan Gavitt. So you're kind of the insider on the inside. You've had multiple conversations. We know that obviously the goal is to play games 11-25. We know that the start of the practice season is going to be 10-20-14. We know that starting at the 21st, coaches are going to be able to have 8 hours on the court with their teams of 12 hours. But where are we right now? How did the NCAA get to this point, Andy? And what are you hearing from Dan Gavitt in terms of protocol, the patience, and the plan moving forward?
Well, thanks for having me, Seth, and great to be with you and Kevin. I will just say this. First of all, because of what happened last March, the NBA and college basketball were the first two sporting events, and I think maybe Indian Wells and tennis, to be canceled in the United States. And there was no way that the NCAA, all its members, could afford to go another March Madness without having the NCAA tournament, without having a regular season. And also, I think having the benefit of time and seeing what college football maybe didn't do as well, I think was huge. There is definitely one voice, and not necessarily one voice as in Dan's voice, but one voice coming forward of saying, okay, we're going to have a season, we're going to have a tournament, and here are the parameters for making it happen. The reason they came up with Thanksgiving week was the majority of schools, if they are having any in-person learning or students on campus, are basically sending everyone home Thanksgiving week or right before that. And so there is some optics involved here, but they didn't necessarily want to start a new sport, one of this magnitude, while they're still having students on campus and cycling off of campus. So that's why they came up with Thanksgiving week. Could it have been Monday the 23rd? Certainly. But the 25th on that Wednesday, that's pretty much when everyone's going to be gone. And you can't afford, and we can talk about this, to have that window of time in December where there's going to be more than likely, not officially, but no NBA, no NFL, no NHL, maybe no bowl games, all these windows and all these weeks to have games that you're going to need to have to potentially spread out to make sure you get your season in. You couldn't risk not having that window. And that was part of the thinking in going with the date that was announced on Wednesday by the Division I Council.
And you mentioned the date. 76% of the college and universities are going to be off campus by the 25th. 76%, as opposed to if you start a week before, it's only about 43%. So that's a significant difference. Now, Keatsy, All right, so you're sitting there. You find out we're starting the season on the 25th. All right, we're going to be allowed to schedule 7 non-conference games because the ACC plays 20 conference games. What went through your mind? I mean, like, now, can you take your schedule as it is and adjust it, or do you have to actually go out from basically from the beginning and start your scheduling procedure?
Well, Seth, thanks again for having me on, and obviously it's always great to hear from Andy. I will say this first. We were excited, obviously, in our players, and I think I speak for all of the coaches in the ACC, to have a start day. We have something to look forward to. But when it comes to scheduling, I want you to think about this. Most of us had games scheduled starting November the 10th. And for us, we were going to lose 6 games because of the November 25th start time. That being said, I thought it was a great date to start. You know, when you look at us, for example, our exams are the 18th through the 24th. And so that gives us a little window when our students are able to go home where we can play and not have a lot of people on campus. For us, I think as a conference, we're still trying to figure out what exactly we're going to do. We know that we're going to play 20 conference games, and we hope that there's an opportunity to have the Big Ten and ACC challenge again. We think that's a tremendous challenge. I know ESPN does a great job with that. That being said, what we're going to do at NC State is we're going to take the games that will happen after the 25th and hopefully keep those in place and try to figure out if we can save our MTE. We have a tremendous MTE, you know, in our MTE with Baylor, Villanova, and Michigan, but it was actually before the 25th start. So if we can figure out how to save that, because in my experience, I would love to play 27 games. We don't know how the schedule is going to go. We don't know how many times there are going to be cancellations. And so if I can have the opportunity to play more games, knowing that if we schedule 27, there's a great chance we may only play 21. So we're going to take our existing, scheduled teams and try to play those and just try to figure out how to play our MTE.
Hey, Andy and Kevin, both, we talk about protocol, and I think that's the key. Like, and I remember when I read something a couple of weeks ago when the ACC said they just wanted to play league games because, let's face it, they know within the league they're going to have testing a minimum of 3 times a week, and basically everyone's going to have a level playing field. So, like, for both of you guys, do you think that the NCAA will try to legislate a protocol, or do you think they'll leave it up to the conferences? And, like, Kevin, like, if you're going to schedule a non-conference game, will you hold your opponent to a certain protocol, or you can't play that team?
Yeah, Seth, those are great questions. I'll let Andy answer more about the NCAA. I don't know that part of it, but I will say this. We have a rule in our conference that, and it started in football, our football team is testing 3 times a week. And as we get into season, as the basketball programs, we will test 3 times a week. And it will be very hard for us to play a non-conference team that will not test the same way that we're testing.
Yeah, so a couple things. First of all, technically, the NCAA only controls the tournament. And we're seeing that with college football. But there will be advisories. There is a coronavirus medical panel that was out for all sports football. I've interviewed these doctors multiple times on the NCAA Twitter feed. So there will be really guardrails of what is expected, but it can't be legislated of saying, okay, you have to test, every day, 72 hours, but there will be these rails up. And I agree with Kevin. I don't think you will see any team play another one, regardless of conference, if they're not at least comparable in the testing. So that's why what I think we're going to see are basically mini pods. I don't know if I'd call them bubbles because everyone thinks bubbles. They're thinking what we're seeing with the NBA and the WNBA. Basically, so for what Kevin's talking about with his event, the Gazelle Group, which runs that one, is right now talking about bringing that up to the Mohegan Sun in Connecticut. So you would have, those teams and maybe other teams there on site, on campus, one hotel, one testing protocol. Everyone arrives at the same time. Everyone's tested X amount before you can get on that court and participate. and then maybe you bring in some of these other schools that may be at one bid leagues to participate as well, because now they're under that same umbrella. I do not think we're going to see, and this is where it'll be interesting contractually, but I just don't think we're going to see those traditional one-off guaranteed games that Kevin used to play when he was at Wilmington. But, where NC State hosts Radford, for example, just on a random Thursday night in November or December. I can't see those games happening, even though there may be contracts for those games under this new, basically the parameters that we're going to have to deal with for this season.
I could see those games happening if it's a local game, Andy. Like if a team just has to get on a bus, drive to NC State, play a game, turn around, and drive back. I could, if the protocol is correct.
Yeah, are they doing the protocols? That's the key.
Yeah, but here's my bigger concern. Say North Carolina State wants to play at the Mohegan Sun. Well, right now, the state of North Carolina, if they come to Connecticut, there's a 14-day quarantine. That's mandatory. How will the different governments handle when you bring a team that's from an area that has a quarantine if they arrive to an area that requires teams to a school or a state to have a certain number of days quarantine prior to competition, or needs to be quarantined once they cross that border? What do you think, Andy, the NCAA is going to do, or the different conferences are going to do when it comes to that?
Well, I think the onus is on them to get the exemption. We're seeing there are exemptions in Major League Baseball and the NFL. I mean, the Dolphins just played at the Patriots. If a regular person flies from Florida to Boston, they would have to technically quarantine for 14 days. The Dolphins did not. We just saw this, with the U.S. Open, with all these foreign players coming to the U.S., and then they actually worked it the other way when everyone flew off to Rome for the Italian Open and now the French Open, where they were allowed exemptions coming from the United States. Because right now the United States, Europe doesn't want U.S. citizens. So they had exemptions from people that were in the U.S. coming to Europe because they were athletes. And so that's what's going to have to happen. That's another hurdle that's going to have to be cleared at these various state governmental levels, because it's not just going to Connecticut. It might be coming back out of Connecticut to a specific state, depending upon where everyone's positivity rates are at that time.
Kevin, have you guys discussed that within the league, or about the different states and the different regulations that each state is under?
Yeah, Seth, I want you to think about this, and I think every college coach and every conference in the country is going to have to figure this out. During the Christmas break, we're mandated for our guys to have to go home, for 3 days. For us, it will be the 23rd, 24th, and 25th. Let's look at it another way. Those kids all have to return to campus, and we have to now figure out, do they have to quarantine? How many times do we have to test them before we can play a conference game? And so I think it's so much stuff that still needs to be discussed. We're talking about one of the biggest things that a lot of people don't talk about as we plan this season is how are we going to deal with contact tracing? How are we going to figure out, if somebody on one team, comes down with the virus, number one, how does it affect that particular team? But if they played against somebody else, does that take both teams out? And so I think it's so early. I'm excited that we have our start date, but I think our work begins now to try to figure a lot of different things out.
So if
the other area, and you have the information, the other area is the officials. Like if you don't put them in pods, these officials aren't going to do it. Like normally officials, they leave on Monday, they come home on Sunday. All right. And they're going site to site to site to site. We know that's not safe for anyone. And the officials are as important as the players. Eddie, how are they dealing with the officials?
Well, so you're right, Seth. That was sort of something that's not been discussed publicly, but it has been discussed privately. The need to have these officials be in one spot. The crews are going to have to be more regional. You're not going to have, one official that lives in Omaha and another one that lives in Morgantown all coming together. So we're going to see crews that are going to be not used to working together, and that they're going to have to change. We may see crews that don't normally work certain leagues because they just have to live in that area. But picking up on two things that Kevin said, the contact tracing thing is huge. That is a whole big elephant in the room. And we just saw this in college football with Charlotte and North Carolina on Thursday, a game that was canceled for this Saturday because an entire offensive line couldn't isn't available for Charlotte, yet no one on that offensive line was positive. It was due to contact tracing. So that's a huge thing. And what I don't think would work in basketball was what the Big Ten just announced on Wednesday, which is if someone's positive, they got to sit 21 days, not just 14. You can maybe get away with that in football. You could have 4 quarterbacks. You may only have 1 or 2 point guards. So there's a lot of things that I don't think apply universally to every sport that I think are going to have to be massaged here going forward as we put this whole thing together. And the one thing I'll just pick up on Kevin said about Christmas, because I asked this question to Dan Gavitt, because that had been put into legislation for mental health and student athlete rights to allow players to have that break. And I asked, is that really smart this particular year to let these kids go home? And the answer was, that's what they want. And we're not going to jeopardize it. And so if that's the case, like Kevin said, you may have to build in your conference schedule on the back end at least X amount of days to ensure that you've got that testing done if we're not in a better place, before they're allowed to come back to competition.
You mentioned the players, and Andy, you brought this up on our podcast today. In the room where it happens, where these different scenarios were discussed, you had commissioners, you had coaches, you had athletic administrators, and something new, you also had a player's voice. Explain that a little bit.
So this is another example where I'm going to trumpet college basketball over college football, because everyone was working with one voice in terms of wanting the right thing to happen, which is to play and play safely. And the NABC, got to give them credit under the new leadership of Craig Robinson. The coach director is Jamie Dixon right now, and working with Dan Gavitt, they came up with this players council, and there's high profile players on it: Wendell Moore, Keon Brooks, Corey Kispert, Joshua Langford, just to name a few. And they went to these, they had Zoom calls, and they got their advice, and they all wanted non-conference games. They wanted that break at Christmas, and more than anything, they want a season. And, we're seeing all this discussion from college football where a lot of players didn't feel like their voice was heard. Well, this is just, I know, a snapshot, a little, smattering of players here, not representative maybe of the entire Division I, but at least there were some. And that's a change that we had not seen in years past.
Kevin, the voices of your players, what are you hearing from your players on, one, knowing there's a start of the season, and two, now that they're back on campus, and you guys have had outbreaks, how do you handle that, and how excited are they to actually have something to look forward to?
Well, I want you to think about one thing, Seth, and I'm only talking about us. I thought at the end of the year we were playing really good basketball. We had our senior night against Wake Forest and won a really good game, and then we go into the ACC tournament and play against Pitt and had a chance to play Duke for the second time, and we had split on the year. And then all of a sudden your season's over on March 12th. I think every basketball player in the country, especially my guys, are just excited to get back on the court. It's been a long 6 or 7 months, trying to figure this thing out. What we've told our guys is, I want you to be as careful as you can on campus. We want you to wear a mask. We don't want you to go to parties. We don't want you to be in large gatherings. We want you to be very respectful. I've got some local guys. If you go around your parents or grandparents, make sure you understand that you could get someone else sick. And I think our guys are excited. I had a couple guys tweeted out November 25th. We've all been waiting for a date just to know that we're playing basketball, because it was taken away just like that, and that hasn't ever happened before. So the excitement is there. I think you're going to see a different excitement as we get closer to the 25th, and hopefully we all maintain and try to be safe so that can happen on that day.
And you speak to people all over the country, and I'll get Kevin's feedback on it. What are guys doing right now with their teams?
So it's interesting. It's very much state by state. I mean, some teams, I don't know what Kevin's doing, but I'd be curious to hear. Some have to practice with a mask on. Pretty much, I would say it's universal. The coaches are wearing a mask. Some are wearing gloves, but all the coaches are wearing masks. And it was early on in the summer where it was really the number of human beings in the gym mattered. So you had coaches back to their old days of their shag and rebounds because a manager counted as to how many people you could have in that gathering, or a grad assistant or whoever, another player. So it really had to be limited. And then there are some schools like UCLA, because of rules in the state of California, or at least Southern California, have not even been able to be on the court. So it varies across the country. Some have had their own little mini pods for a month in the summer where they tested and everyone was clear and everything was clean. Others have had to shut down multiple times in their workouts because of positive tests. Very few I've talked to have done 5-on-5. At least now they're gradually coming out of just skill work and maybe teaching. So we're at least progressing out of that. But once again, I got to quote Cal here, because Cal said this, to me a couple of weeks ago when we had something similar. He's like, look, it's not going to be fair. It's not going to be equitable. Let's just accept that and move on.
Keatts, what are you doing with your guys? You're going now to the ability to have your guys for 8 hours on the floor and then 12 hours in terms of a week.
Yeah, and Andy
accomplish those 8 hours.
Yeah, Andy, Cal is right. It's never going to be fair when he's got all those really good players down there. So he's exactly part of it. No, Seth, we're taking everything slow. We started off in groups of 4, and what I did, if those guys live together, we consider them one family. So if anybody was to break out, we wouldn't lose our entire team. We could contact Trace, and it would be just those 4 guys who would have to quarantine. We've since then, we've worked our way up to some 3-on-3 action, little 4-on-4, but we haven't went 5-on-5. It's kind of hard to do that at this point. Our coaches, we're wearing masks. Our players are not required to wear masks. We're taking this thing really slow for a couple reasons. We don't want an outbreak. If you get an outbreak, it's pretty hard to, you've got to quarantine for 14 days. And then those guys who actually contact the virus, it may take up to 21 to 31 days. And so we're trying to take that slow. We didn't want to push them too early without a start date. And so now that we know that we can go to 8 hours on September the 21st, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to use all of our 8 hours. I think you have to take it, and it depends on your team. With my team, I've got some veteran guys, but I got 5 new guys that, unfortunately, I've got to bring along really quick because they won't have an exhibition, they won't have a scrimmage, and they got to go right into playing right away.
Yeah, that's I just think it's really interesting how you move along the quarantine before we get off of this. So if you have a kid test positive and you do your contact tracing, and say you have to separate 3 players, you talk about mental health. What do you, when you separate those guys and put them in quarantine, where do they go? What do they do? How are you able to communicate with them to keep their spirits up? Because let's face it, I mean, the mental aspect of this, the mental health aspect of this pandemic is real. And so how are you dealing with that?
Yeah, Seth, that's a tremendous question. We worry about our guys. I want you to think about this. If a young man has to quarantine, we have dorms on campus, but it's a room. And, think about all of us. It would drive us crazy. We had to stay in one place for 14 days. What I'm telling my coaches is just to have as much communication as we can with them. Be very encouraging of those guys because it's a tough situation. And so we're trying to, I'm very grateful, Seth, that the NCAA is not only giving us 8 hours, but 12 hours because we get a chance to spend more time around our players. And I know that sounds a little weird because of what's going on with COVID-19, but you get a chance now to have more access to them, not even just to work them out, just to be able to see them.
Like right now, how many of your guys are taking, everything is online at NC State, right?
Yes, Chef. Everything, all of our classes are online. Typically, our freshman class would have to stay on campus. And thanks to our chancellor and our athletic director for understanding that, we could have a situation with our guys being on campus. We were able for this first time to move all of our guys off campus and to off-campus apartments, which has been really good for us. The tough thing about every university is, when you bring 20,000 people back, it's going to be some outbreaks. And unfortunately, we had a couple ourselves.
So, Andy, you have a daughter that's starting freshman year at Northwestern. All right. So that's a Big Ten school. Just for a normal student, what are the adjustments a normal student, like Kevin's talking about, he's got this large freshman class. The adjustments a normal student has to make to transition to basically distance learning while they're still in that community.
Yeah, look, I mean, I worry about this all the time. You know that, Seth, first of all, the class of 2020 got everything taken away last spring, and now they're having to go and start college either at home or, in apartments or even maybe in dorms, but almost exclusively remotely. And what that does is it makes it even more difficult to meet people. And, that can lead to isolation, loneliness. And so I worry about the mental health, not just, for my daughter, her friends, and everyone else, but just it's a really difficult time. The online learning, we've only had a couple of days of it because they just started late, but you hope that it's much better at the university level, certainly in the high school level, but it's never going to be the same at all. You hope that the classes that you're taking online are more the sort of the large lecture classes rather than the small discussion groups that you normally would need face-to-face instruction with, or at least be more engaging. So, I think we sometimes forget, at least the basketball players have that outlet of being on the court and with no mask and all that. And, I'm also selfish here in thinking that what's not getting enough attention is, you mentioned my daughter. My daughter's a theater major, and the arts right now have absolutely been crushed. I mean, Broadway's been off since March, but that's at the headline. I mean, all plays, all theater, all singing, all of that, no more for the foreseeable future. So that's been really difficult. And there's a whole aspect to that of when am I going to be able to be in a play? When am I going to be able to sing again? And so all those kinds of things have been incredibly disruptive.
That's a good perspective, Kevin. With the academics being all online, I mean, I know when I was at Tech, we had great support from our academic support services, and we had set study halls, and we had, one-on-one tutoring. How do you deal with the academic support services for your guys when they're taking online classes, and yet you're trying to create as safe an environment as possible?
Yeah, Seth, that's been a challenge, and we, obviously second semester of last year, we went online. And so I'm dealing with a couple different fronts. I have a 16-year-old here at home and also a 12. And so my wife's done a tremendous job at home. And I like to say I'm doing a good job with our guys that's on campus. But we've had to have several conversations, and you have to teach the guys a new way to study. We're still doing our tutoring over Zoom. We're still making sure guys are doing all the right stuff. I've had to have conversations before with guys about if you're on a tutor, if you're on a call with a tutor, to make sure you have your video on. It's kind of changed the way that we've done things. I'll say this, I've got a good freshman class that I brought in. It's going to be a culture change, and those guys have done a tremendous job. You worry about those guys, but so far those guys have an overall GPA as a 3.5, and we want to kind of continue to build on it. I think it's a tough thing for everybody in the country because everybody doesn't do well on online classes.
Both you guys, Kevin and Andy, you think we'll have, once we get to league play, do you think we'll have fans in the stands, 25% of a facility? I mean, like, I talked to Dockich the other day, like the Indiana Colts only have 2,500 people in Lucas Oil Stadium. That's the max. Yet their soccer team can have like 10,000 people at the game. Where do you think the ACC is, and Andy, nationally, where do you think college basketball is in terms of, do you think we're going to have fans at the NCAA tournament? Do you think that we're just going to be one big pod? Do you think that, Kevin, like is there going to be an ACC tournament? And if there is, will we have any fan involvement?
You want me to go first or Kevin?
Let's Kevin go first. You're long-winded.
Yeah, listen, I think it's going to come down to each state. I really do. Like if you're holding me to it, Seth, and you're making me take a guess, and you like to do that with me, I would say that.
So I got to put you on the spot as many times as I can.
I know you do, I would say I would guess that early on there will be probably only families only. I think as we get towards the end of the year, if we're fortunate enough or lucky enough to have some type of vaccine, or in 2021, I think all of that could change. I couldn't tell you about the ACC tournament, whether we're going to have it or not. I hope we do. I think it's, it's obviously a great tournament. But I think as we start, I think it'll increase as things get better or decrease as things get worse. But I think it comes down to each particular state.
Andy, what are you hearing?
All right. So first of all, I agree with Kevin. We're already seeing that in college football. There were fans of Florida State and Kansas State and not fans at other schools. I don't see any scenario where there are fans in November, early December. Could we see fans, in January? Well, let me rephrase that. I think that the majority of schools will not have any fans in that time. There still could be some of these outposts that I just mentioned, state by state. As we get into conference play, then we might see it start to come back, depending on where we are in the virus, where we are in vaccines, treatments, all of that. Will go a long way into whether we see fans. As for the NCAA tournament, there are contingency plans. We talked about that. Could they have to bubble it? If they do, they certainly can. They're not worried about that. If they have to do it, they can do it, and they can pay for it. Will there be fans? It's way too early to know. In the state of Indiana, as you said with Dockich, there have been places where there are fans, so maybe that could happen. But could I see them having a packed Lucas Oil? I think it's way premature to say that. I'd be probably surprised, unfortunately, if that were the case. But I'm going to still be hopeful. I will say this to Kevin. How about this? If there are no fans at Cameron, how much does that change going on the road at Duke?
What do you mean? It'll be the same. Fans doesn't influence anything at Cameron.
Guys in the striped shirts, you can't say that. No.
No, look, I'll say this. You guys know this. We have some tremendous home court advantages in our league. And fan bases, when you talk about, Duke fan base, they're great. Ours is great. I was telling our guys, the way we press and we get after it, those guys help us sometime on a run. And so what we talked about is, now you have to build your team up to make sure that your culture is right, where they're cheering every possession for every player, because you won't have those fans anymore.
Well, and if I can just piggyback on that, I was obviously kidding about that, but Cameron's actually a really good example. If you were to compare Cameron and where you guys play in Raleigh, which is a pro arena for obviously the Carolina Hurricanes, much easier to spread people out at your facility in Raleigh than it would be at Cameron. Cameron is just basically almost like a fire hazard, and everyone's on top of each other. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been spit on, not intentionally, but just from people screaming and yelling when I've been along press row. So I really also think the venue will have a lot to do with whether or not there are fans and whether or not you can really appropriately social distance them within the confines and the structure of that arena.
Andy, how would you like to be coaching that environment and get spit on?
Well, it's unintentionally for me, maybe intentionally for you.
Your arena, though, like I did your Duke game this year. I mean, that's a great home court because whatever it seats, 19 or 21,000, whatever it seats. I mean, it's incredible. They're great. Look, the ACC, the games aren't games; they're events, and that's the history of the league. It's the history of the rivalries within the league. It's the closeness of the schools within the league, especially the core members of the league that have these long-standing traditional rivalries. So. And it's like that in the Big Ten. It's like that in the Big 12. I'm interested to see if there's any conversation, Kevin, about doing pods within the league and taking things off campus so that you limit travel, especially when you're going, say, for you guys, when you're going to play Syracuse and Boston College and Pitt, and say you could take 3 or 4 of those teams and go schools out of session, and you could play 3 games in 12 days and on one trip, as opposed to 3 separate trips to 3 separate cities, talking about officials. You can bring the officials right to that pod. Has there any conversation been regarding that?
Yeah, a couple of things that we've talked about, Seth. We've talked about, because we're one of the teams that's fortunate enough to have 2 arenas. And so there is a chance that we may play a few of our games in Reynolds Coliseum, which I think is great, especially, if there are no fans there. We haven't. We're like every other conference that has talked about bubbles in different places. There was an article that came out a couple of days ago about Greensboro wanting to do a bubble for the ACC. I know our women's team in the ACC have talked about a bubble. I think right now everything's on the table. Paul Rizzo, who I love, I think he's got a tough job because he's got to figure out, how can we play, who can we play, what type of pods that we can play in. But it's a tough thing to finish. It's not an easy deal to deal with. And I think, one of the things we got to figure out is what is the safest thing for our kids? What's the best way to put them in the best situation that we can?
Yeah. All right, last question. Let you guys go. And I can't thank you guys enough. I mean, to me, there's so much going on. Obviously, we have this great enthusiasm about the start of the season and the starting date. And I know as a coach, knowing that you're going to be with your players for 8 hours on the floor to have some sense of normalcy is so important. Andy, for you, we'll start with you. Who's your sleeper team? Who's your national champion? Give me 3 players that we should be looking at.
Wow. All right. So Kevin obviously would like, he's making me think about NC State as a sleeper, but, top players, Luka Garza from Iowa, Ayo Dosunmu from Illinois, so 2 in the Big Ten, Jared Butler from Baylor. I think those will all be, 3 of maybe the top 5 in America. I had them as 3 of my top 5 returning players. So those are some of the top players I would certainly look at.
You got a freshman or 2 that we should keep an eye on?
Well, obviously Christopher at ASU. Now I'm drawing a blank here. Oklahoma State. Help me out, Oklahoma State.
Okay, Cunningham.
Cunningham, yes.
So those are freshmen. In terms of teams, I love Gonzaga because they've got basically everyone back, plus Jalen Suggs, another freshman coming in.
Timmy's going to have a monster year.
Yeah. Illinois and Iowa out of the Big Ten would probably be the 2 that I would look at. Villanova out of the Big East.
What about your alma mater?
12. What's that?
What about your alma mater? No love for your alma mater?
I have a lot of love for Wisconsin. I think they lack a star, so that's why I'm holding back a little in terms of putting them in that same category. But they'll be preseason top 10. And they're a great team, but I just don't know about a star right now. So, but I still think they'll be a top 10 team. But like your Creighton, for example, maybe they'll be really high up. Maybe people won't look at them. If you were to tell me Rutgers isn't a sleeper, I think Rutgers is going to be really good and certainly could be considered, a team that should be in the top 20 in the preseason that maybe people aren't discussing right now. And I know one team in Kevin's league never gets the respect that it deserves, and that's Florida State, because every year the ageless one, Leonard Hamilton, makes sure that Florida State is without question a factor.
Rodney Dangerfield of college basketball.
He's the best.
Keatts, when you look at your league, off the top of your head, what do you see?
I think it's a talented league. The league will be a little bit younger again, but in this league you expect that because you typically have some of your really good freshmen and sophomores that become pros right away. Our league will be competitive, but it's weird, and I agree with a lot of the things that Andy said. It's going to be very interesting to see how some of these kids and some of these teams respond when they don't have fans in the stands. Can you be motivated? Are you ready to play against everybody every night? And some of that may determine who's going to obviously be the better teams in the league. And I think our league is tremendous from top to bottom. I've already said this. As you know, we've got Hall of Fame coaches. We've got really good players. I don't have a guy that I could say is going to be player of the year. I just don't know. I don't think it's anybody that stands out like that. I do know that we have some talented freshmen. Of course, Duke always does, Florida State. We've got some really good players in this league, and it's going to be an exciting brand of basketball this year for the ACC.
Hey, if I could add one.
Good. You got a bunch of guys returning now. Go through your return. Your return is obviously a little concern at the point guard, but you got 4 guys returning that. that are all winning players.
Yeah, Chef, I love my bunch. I do. You know, when you think about Manny Bates playing as a freshman, as a leading shot blocker, and then we've got two of our leading scorers back, and Devin Daniels and DJ Funderburg, and we're going to try to play DJ Funderburg and Manny Bates together. And then obviously Jericho Helms was playing great basketball until he had that concussion, and I just got to figure out, you know, who I want to start at the point. You know, we got a couple talented young freshmen, and Cam Hayes, who was a top 100 guy, and Shaquille Moore. And then people forget about we've got a local kid and Thomas Allen, who was at Nebraska, who transferred in, who's going to be a really good basketball player. So I love my team. It's just we've got some really good veterans, and then I've got some young guys. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, you don't get a chance to play them in some early games.
Seth, if I can add one last thing, picking up on what Kevin said on the arenas, and this will be interesting to see. If they make a decision that no fans for an extended period of time, do they invest in trying to make it much more intimate, like what we're seeing obviously in the NBA, where you can't tell that there aren't fans because of the way they've put, you know, sort of these boundaries around the floor, and it just feels much more, for lack of a better word, intimate for the players. And obviously we're getting high-level basketball versus if they're playing in a cavernous, echoey arena with no feel, then I think, to Kevin's point, it's going to be very difficult to sort of self-motivate like that. You know, so how game management happens in these arenas, I think will be very interesting to sort of track.
Yeah.
Good job with the crowd noise. They've done a good job with their virtual crowds. If there are virtual crowds, I just want to let you know, Keatts, I'm going to be in a seat every single night for the Wolfpack, giving it one of these jobs.
Yeah, listen, Seth, we're going to send you what we're doing cutouts, and I would love to have your face at every game. I really would. Just not behind the goal where my guys are shooting free throws.
The glare could blind him. I might be right over your shoulder.
Yeah.
You know, that they wouldn't get him. I don't know about an Andy Katz cutout. He'd probably have to ask too many questions. You know?
We can't afford an Andy Katz cutout, just so you know that.
Hey, thanks so much. And the most important thing is, you know, at least we have a starting date. Our teams are getting healthier. We're having some type of protocol discussions. It's going to be new. It's uncharted. It's going to be different. But you know what? It's going to be new, uncharted, and different for everyone. And, you know, as coaches, we always say that, you know, our job is to help someone get somewhere they can't get themselves. And I think the great thing is, and I say this all the time, and it really ticks me off when people don't understand it. Coaches care about their players so much. They care about their health, their well-being, mentally and physically. They care about their academic success. They stand beside them. They don't stand behind them. They stand beside them. And during these days and during this pandemic and how unusual these times are, I just think that the coaches' commitment to making sure the well-being of the student athletes and their players is at the top of the list. It is always at the top of the list, but I think that now some of these people are going to really see the coaches' genuine interest. They think for some reason there's a conversation, it's all about money. You know, it's not all about money because, Kevin, when you got into coaching, you didn't get into coaching. You had no idea you were going to make all that money. You were getting paid at Hargrave. You weren't making any money. You didn't get it. You got into it to change lives, to help someone, you know, better themselves, to, you know, improve their academics so they could go to a 4-year school, and then to help a player develop athletically, mentally, emotionally, mentally. And that's what coaches are doing right now. And I hope that we start to tell those stories more and mitigate the stories of, well, you're that guy, he just wants to get that guy eligible to win games. No, he wants to get that guy eligible so that that guy can take one step closer to fulfilling whatever and every dream he has to fulfill. So
thank you.
You guys, appreciate you.
Yeah.
Be safe.
Thanks, Seth.